Wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
The body of a man is a microcosm, the whole world in miniature, and the world in turn is a reflex of man. The hair upon his head corresponds to woods of the earth, his tears to a river, his mouth to the ocean. Also, the world resembles the ball of his eye. The ocean that encircles the earth is like unto the white of the eye. The dry land is the iris, Jerusalem the pupil, and the temple the image mirrored in the pupil of the eye. Welcome all. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed, and I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening, and I do pray that you are having a blessed new year and that life finds you of good health and well-being. I have as co-host this evening, as always, Kathy Dunson. Kathy, are you there, sister?
Yes, I am, and I wanted to point out that what you just read was from Legends of the Jews.
Yes, it's a most excellent text, and for those that have never heard of it or looked into it, it gives quite a lengthy and exorbitant testimony and affirms the biblical narrative, beginning with Genesis, going through all of the generations, the creation of Adam and Eve, all the beasts, and so it's a fascinating text to examine and look through. But the reason that I read it is because Casey, who is our guest for this evening, he did a show a long time ago where he spoke about how the enclosed world system is reminiscent of an eyeball. And so I'd like to welcome to the show once more Casey Brown, Enter the Stars. How are you, brother?
Good. Hello, Zen. Hello, Kathy. How are you guys doing this evening?
Doing well, man. I'm glad that you could take the time to join
Casey.
us.
Welcome.
Casey, Kathy loves you, Casey, so she's always glad to
That's
have
awesome.
you on with us.
Love you guys.
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, we love you too, brother. And we both, you and I, and Kathy, all of us, we've been confirming witness for one another on so many aspects of truth that are, just coming to light, including as far as the garden parable, what the real fruit, as far as the eating, Eve's eating of the fruit of the tree of the good knowledge of good and evil, what all of that really represents. And so that was a huge blessing. And then also with regard to this, as the world, the flat earth and the enclosed world system, this is a even larger and more profound revelation. Both of them most certainly keys for unlocking, I believe, so much of what is veiled within Scripture.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many areas to look at when it comes to comparing the inner anatomy of our body, which I believe that God, being an architect, that he actually basically encoded our bodies with the truth about the universe that we live in, so that we could one day, when the knowledge increased in the last days, basically discover who the one and only true God of the Hebrew Bible is. And I've heard the argument from other people and other religions that they believe that that their God is no different than our God. But the difference is, when you start looking at this layout of the Bible and the events that happened, that really did happen, and you begin to decode and overlay that onto our body systems and anatomy and physiology, you understand that it is far too perfect and exact to be mistaken as coincidence. And then what that infers is that thousands of years ago, when these Bible books were written, when there was no knowledge of inner anatomy specifically anyways, there was general knowledge, but nothing to the extent of identifying nerves and muscle groups and things of that nature. And that's where we get the truth.
Yeah, in my opinion, it shows that the architect, the creator, the grand designer, that he encoded within the creation the same thing that we see replicated within the body of mankind. And so that affirms him to be the author and the creator of both. And so we see on the macrocosmic level, the microcosmic, and the earth, which is a union of heaven and hell in the place where both come together, we see this reflected as above, so below, that there's a synchronous, the signature of God is upon all of these things, and it shows that he most certainly is the mastermind, the divine architect, the triunal, the Godhead, that they were responsible for bringing all things into being. And so it's beautiful the way that is reflected, which, for those people that say they don't believe in God and don't see him reflected in the creation, to me, that is just, how can you not see God reflected in all things, in my opinion? Because all of it just shows again, in my opinion, just the divinely inspired nature of the mind of God, so go ahead, Jonas.
Absolutely. And this is the perfect show for an atheist. I did have an atheist come on one of my live shows, and I was a little unprepared because I had lost focus in terms of looking within the body, and I was kind of focused on other things on my channel at the time, and I kind of got blindsided. And he basically was trying to prove that there was no God, but because he was saying that Osiris and the ancient stories of the Egyptians predated Christianity and that Christ's story was just a copycat of that. And of course, we know that's not true, but the bread and butter, I think, of the proof of God is in these miraculous overlays of anatomy. And we're going to get really specific tonight. I came prepared. And I'm going to get really specific about some of these discoveries that we made that overlay the human body. And they're basically, you can't dispute them. They're indisputable.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it shows and affirms that God is the author of both, the creator of the human body, as well as that of the creation. But before we do go into it, let me give you a chance to share your website, contact information, where people can go to support your work. And also, are you coming on at regular times? I know you do a lot of shows, and that some you do on the spur of the moment, but are you on a schedule to where people go and find you and support your work, like on on every Friday or whatever? I don't know. You can let us know, though.
Yeah, Sundays, usually Sunday mornings or Sunday afternoons, I try to get on. I'm trying a new format to where I'm streaming live through my website. So
Awesome.
The announcement will come on YouTube. So you'll get the notification. People who come to my YouTube channel, enter the 5T4RZ, enter the stars. You come on YouTube and subscribe to my channel, you'll get a notification. But then at that point, the live chat will happen on my website, which is enterthe5t4rz.com, enterthestars.com. And we'll have a live chat there, and also it will stream directly to my website. And then there's all kinds of resources on my website for people to use tools to do research. We also have story posts there. And it's also a way for us to eventually get off of YouTube because there's a lot of censorship going on there right now. So that's the goal.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, actually, because we are experiencing the same kind of thing. But it seems like they are cracking down on a lot of channels that are bringing forth truth in different aspects and with regard to different topics, and that they are having restructured it in whatever way they're doing. They're most certainly censoring, filtering comments, even not allowing you to have certain keywords in your title. They are cracking down on, the whole monetization as well, which is affecting all of us because we are doing all of this and have been able to provide our material freely, because we have been able to also insert just ad placement over the videos that we do, and it just takes people four times over the course of a 2-hour video to just click through an ad, which is on like 5 seconds, which that greatly benefits us, and it also keeps the information flowing as far as making it freely available, and it also helps us to be able to do the things that we're doing. But it seems like even Facebook and other social websites, larger social mainstream media sites, that they are all trying to crack down in a different way to keep the mainstream corporate news and the truth as asserted by them at the tops of these listings and search engines. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to find stories and to support the work that we're doing in the way that we're doing it. And so do you want to comment on that? And then we'll
I mean, mostly what I see is everything that you just said, but also they're actually physically on YouTube unsubscribing our subscribers. Mm-hmm. So if you got a new subscriber that comes on and might have heard some of our work, who wants to subscribe to the channel, they may subscribe, and then they kind of go on with their life and just trust that YouTube's going to notify them the next time one of our videos comes up. And this is the perfect time that YouTube chooses to unsubscribe these people. And then the person goes on with life, and life's drowned out by all the miscellaneous empty chatter that's thrown at them in this reality. And then they just kind of forget about us. And then you might not ever find that person again. And then, of course, our regulars, they're physically being unsubscribed from our channel, and they tell us about it, and I'm sure you've experienced it too.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As well as the social pressure that's put on mainstream citizens and people to just not like this kind of material and just to automatically dismiss it based on the heavy troll presence that is on YouTube. It's like a mind warfare, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are dealing with that as well. Go ahead.
I think what Casey has been discovering and bringing forth is some of the most amazing, imaginable, especially for Christians, to see all of this confirmation in the human anatomy. I mean, the actual signature of God on His creation. Christians would be so excited about this. There was such excitement over the laminin, videos discovery. I think it was Louis Giglio who had, I'm pretty sure that he was the one that discovered it. But you've gone to such a deeper level, and it's so amazing. But they just don't know. They can't know. They won't know. And here this is, it just sits. And so I really encourage people to make sure you go to Casey's site and subscribe so you get notices at his site, because it started a few years ago for us on Facebook. I've noticed it's just been kind of a winnowing down. It started with the algorithms, the way they changed that so people wouldn't find you. And, we've dwindled down to just almost nothing, where our followers has, skyrocketed. People like us all the time by the hundreds every week, but no one knows that we're still there. We're just not in people's feeds. So it started for us a couple of years ago, but now it's really on steroids. I mean, people search us out who are the trolls and put in comments, and it brings such a dark spirit to the whole thing. And that's what's happening on YouTube. Anything I like, the likes are taken away now. And that's just constant right now. So it's going to a different level. So people really need to be proactive in knowing where to get the information and sharing it with other people, because this is important. This is God getting this message out. He's there. He's in us. In case he's been given this revelation, I'm just really, really so, how did I get to be so lucky to be among all of you? And so thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that. We're in the last days, and God basically creates a counterbalance to anything that is evil. And for so long, they've had a heyday, with especially some of these new agers and stuff like that. They take a little bit of the knowledge of like from the Egyptians, and then they try to say that the Egyptians had this secret knowledge of the brain anatomy, and then they try to basically dismiss the story of Christ. So this is God's counterbalance. He's like, okay, you want to try to claim this knowledge? Let me show you the knowledge that's in the Bible about the human anatomy. And that's where we're at now. It's an exciting time to be.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I was just going to say, Kathy, you have put forth your effort and have dedicated yourself to Kingdom for quite a number of years. So you deserve to be right here with the rest of us. And so
Thank you.
Yeah, don't put down all your efforts, because you certainly have, done your homework and put forth a lot with regard to assisting the Kingdom and others coming to truth. And you have a unique skill set, just like Casey and our brother Jonathan Kleck. We all have been brought to discernment on similar things and being confirming witnesses for one another in different ways. My whole way that I was brought into discovery of all these things was just by reading and studying all the ancient scriptures from all the extra biblical, everything that's been discovered. You, Casey, have a unique gift to be able to interpret the numerology, the symbolism, the metaphor behind certain things. Jonathan has a gift, a skill set for where he's able to see and decipher different symbolism also in artwork and videos to understand the language in that way. So we're all brought forth to assist God and serve humanity and his sheep in different ways. But again, we're all being led to similar truth, because truth is truth, and no matter where it is, it underlines all things. And so we're all just recognizing that in different ways. And so it's a huge blessing that, because we are the fig tree generation and we are at the end of days, and we are seeing all of this being poured out on all flesh. And so yeah, that's a huge blessing. But let me give you both each a chance to comment, and then I want to share just really quick 2 questions that have come in. I get a number of them, but just to address a couple things that people were asking about. Go ahead, Casey.
Well, I guess maybe we should handle the questions first, and then maybe get into some of this anatomy.
Yeah, most certainly. Kathy, did you want to comment on anything before
Nope, I'm good. Let's go.
All right. Well, there were many questions. No, I just did a 3.5-hour show on New Year's Eve about the calendar system with David Carrico, John Pounders, and John Hall. There's been a number of questions that have come in, and because today actually is Sabbath according to God's lunar calendar, which is, it only falls, it switches monthly. And so this month, Sabbath will actually fall on Saturday. Next month, it will fall on Sundays. And so I'm going to actually address this. And so the Jews are actually right this month, and the Christians will be right next month. But then after that, it will move to falling on Tuesdays for the month of March. But I'm going to just read this really quick. It sums up a few questions that were brought forth, and then I'll cover one other thing, and then we'll move forward. The Hebrew calendar ends with the month of Adar, and whenever necessary, according to the barley feast, Adar 2, as happened last year. Rosh Chodesh Tibet, which is the month that we are in now and which began on New Year's Eve night. As I said on the show, New Year's Eve night was Sabbath, which makes this Saturday Sabbath, January 7th. The 14th will be Sabbath, the third Sabbath, the 21st, and the 27th. So Sabbath will align on Saturdays this month. Rosh Chodesh Shavat, which is the month of Shavat, will fall on January 29th. And the Sabbaths then will align to February 5th, February 12th, February 19th, and February 26th. And then Rosh Chodesh for the month of Adar happens on February 28th. And so it will be every 7 days after that. And it's actually the month of Adar, which ends the Hebrew calendar. And so, and there's one other thing I wanted to cover really quickly. It's because people have been writing me about the recent release of Steve Quayle's video where he's interviewing Henry Groover, and he's talking about a vision of being taken out through the cosmos when he had a near-death experience. And he says and affirms within that that video that the Earth is a sphere. And so I wanted to address that because a lot of people are contacting me and asking me about that as well. And so this is the comment that I have, and this will lead into what we're going to cover. But I wrote this. I have great respect for both Steve Quayle and Henry Groover, but God's word in and of itself declares that the earth is a flat, circular plane and unmoving, as I have affirmed in my 9th book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. There are many who, like Henry Groover, declare that what they have seen in vision is the earth in a shape of a spear or a ball. And I don't doubt that this is what they believe they have seen. However, my only question is whether our indoctrination and preconceived notions have influence on what we see and how we interpret what we see during vision, as also happens within dreams. For instance, what we see in the world with regard to the ocean, the landscapes, and the horizon are all flat, which is why we refer to the place where the ocean meets the land as sea level. And though all landscapes affirm in appearance the earth as a flat plane, because of our indoctrination, humanity interprets what we and they see through such filter. Most will swear that they see curvature and rotundity as reflected by the earth, but when you go to measure such curvature and rotundity, as Parallax did in the Bedford level experiment, you discover that curvature is non-existent, which is one of the main reasons why I began to question the earth being a globe and accepted that the earth is in fact a flat plane. And so I do not deny that Henry Groover and others believe that they saw the earth as a globe in their visions, but when it comes to scientifically determining whether the earth is a plane or a sphere, as determined by real scientific experimentation, such as Michelson-Morley, the Michelson-Morley Gale, Airy's failure, the Sagnac experiments, and so many others, there most certainly is no curvature, nor is there any motion or movement to the earth. The Bible also says in several places that the earth is fixed and immovable. Real science, repeatable, also affirms the same. And so no matter what one thinks about the shape of the earth, it is not in any way moving at any rate of speed. This too is a fact that can be measured in determination and has been many times by many scientists around the world, which is actually another reason why I began to doubt the whole heliocentric model of the earth spinning once daily as it annually orbits around the sun. This simple fact alone puts into question all that science affirms with regard to heliocentricity. Let's go to Kathy first, and then we'll go to Casey.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Pastor Dean Odell had written an article that just came out last week, and I highly recommend anyone who has questions about flat earth and biblical flat earth, the cosmology that we've talked about on many shows, go to deanodell.org, and it's in his articles. It's called God's Flat Earth, the Firmament of His Power. And that's really all I have to say.
Okay, excellent. And just so you know, and the listening audience know, Pastor Dean will be coming on again with us at the end of this month or the beginning of February. Casey, we've got a break coming up, but I'm going to give you a chance to comment, and then we'll go into this when we return.
Sure. Yeah, I think in preparation, after people come back for the break, if you do have your computers pulled up, you're going to want to get some anatomy pictures ready, specifically the inner eye and the brain, as we lay out basically the journey from heaven to earth as it's laid out in the human brain. And it'll be helpful to be looking at some of these images as we're kind of talking about some of this stuff.
Excellent. All right, we'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. I was just to set up, I was just reading a text earlier today, because on the Sabbath, I like to spend my time reading scripture, and that's my way of communing with God, and also in resting and honoring the seventh day of rest, and also in seeking out deeper, more intimate relationship with the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so anyways, I was reading a text called the Mother of Books, which is interesting. It's a very ancient Islamic text, but it also, as I was discovering in reading it, it also affirms, just like this passage that I read from the Legends of the Jews, where it speaks about the human body as being a microcosm of the creation. It talks about that as well. And one of the interesting aspects of this, and I'm going to do an actual whole show on this later, but I discovered within it that it also expressly speaks about how the firmament was established, as I had said in my 10th book, The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth, that it was established to imprison and to contain the fallen angels once they were cast out and exiled here to the earth from the upper heavens, which I was just blown away, because, that's just revelation that God led me to on, and I've never found actual quote in scripture which was directly related to that. And so at some point later in the future, I'm going to do a show on that and share that with everybody, because it was absolutely mind-blowing and affirming. But let me go ahead and turn this over to you, Brother Casey, and allow you to set this up.
Sure. And, I'd like to probably start with a brand new discovery that we just made today, which takes us all the way back into the innermost portions of our brain. And I think this is where the journey starts, at the very throne of God. So this is amazing, because in 1 Kings 10:18-20, they describe a throne. Now, this is a throne that was actually fashioned by one of the Israelite kings, the ancient Hebrew kings. And they describe this throne, which I believe they're describing God's throne, because Israel was God's basically kingdom on earth, right? Well, in this passage, it talks about a gold covered ivory throne. And from the sound of it, it almost sounds like this is the gray and white matter of the brain. White matter being inside, being the ivory, and the gold covering the ivory throne being the gray matter, or the outer shell. Now, it also describes in this passage 6 steps that come down from this throne, and I believe that those are the 6 stages of the cerebellum as it leaves the spinal cord. And these 6 steps actually hold the intercranial nerves. Now, there's 12 total intercranial nerves, and if for people that aren't sure what this is, it's a good time to pull up a diagram in Google in images and actually look at the underside of the brain, where the spinal cord attaches into the underside of the brain. And what you will very quickly see when you pull up these images is they will tell you the 12 pairs of intracranial nerves. Well, when you look at this upside down image of the brain, it looks like a giant sofa couch. And if you read the description here in 1 Kings, they describe armrests, which look like the lobes of the brain. They also describe 12 lions, which there's actually 6 on each side. And these are half of the intracranial nerves that exist in front of the cerebellum, and then the other half of the intracranial nerves are kind of like in and above the throne. And those are mentioned in another verse. But there are 12 sets in total, 24. And this is amazing because in this verse, you get to understand what you're pretty much looking at. The lions become the nerves. Now, in The Wizard of Oz, the lion talks about if I only had a brain, and he says there's a song called about nerves, if I only had the nerve. And so now we begin to associate these lions to nerves, which makes sense because nerves carry energy, power, impulses, right, of electricity. And lions are somewhat vocal animals, the top of the food chain, so to speak, in the wild kingdom. So this was the discovery that we made today, which is just unbelievably amazing. We went and one to 3, and we get the other set of, because remember, there's 12 sets altogether, and so that's 24 total. First Kings describes the first 6 sets being these lions, which are inside of the armrest or inside of the lobes on these 6 steps that are leading up to the throne of God. But then the story continues in Isaiah because it says someone saw the Lord sitting on a throne. I think it was Uzziah, or maybe it was Isaiah. And he says, and so if you look at the underside of the brain, you see that it also describes the robe which filled the temple. And you look at the cerebellum, and it almost looks like a robe flowing down into the central portion of the brain. Okay, it's like streaming down. And there's a section of the brain called the pons, which looks like the continuation of God's robe. And then it talks about 2 seraphim, and we know there are 2 because it says one speaks to the other. And it says that the seraphim were above the throne. And so if you look at this section of the brain, you will see the seraphim, which is basically, you're going to see 2 that are attached, 2 of these nerves that are attached to the face of the medulla, which would be like the face of God. And it says in the scripture that 2 wings cover the face. It says that 2 wings cover the feet, and 2 wings are flying of the seraphim that are over above the throne of God. And this is the exact anatomy that you see in the brain with these nerves. So you actually see the seraphim flying over the face of God. Now, for some people that don't understand this, there's actually a Bible verse where I think it was Jacob said he saw the face of God, and he was in a place called Peniel. Well, the place called Peniel, I believe, is the pineal gland. And if you're standing in that position where the pineal gland is, and you look back at the brain, you see God sitting in his throne, which is the brain inverted with the cerebellum sitting inside of it. So this is pretty amazing. There are exactly 3 pairs of nerves entering that part of the brain, which sound just like the 3 sets of wings of the seraphim in Isaiah 6:1-3. Now, as we leave the brain, we then enter into the visual pathway of light. Okay, and this is where things get really interesting, because as light enters your eyes, it regulates different functions of the body, specifically the pineal gland and the dance between serotonin and melatonin in your pineal gland, because your pineal gland regulates that. Well, when light is shut off from your eyes, melatonin is released. It's all regulated by light. And at that point, you become sleepy. That's the effect that melatonin has on your body. So there's this dance between melatonin and serotonin. Serotonin is your waking hours. Melatonin is your sleeping hours. And so I believe that that is the land of milk and honey. And specifically, when we see Jesus at the pineal position where the optic nerves cross in your brain, okay, that's where Jesus would have been between the two eyes. Well, he was crucified in a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. So your two eyes are in your skull. And near him at the crucifixion were the two thieves. I believe those are the two eyes. And he turned to one thief before he died, and he said, "You will be with me in paradise." Why? Because the thief, even though he was a thief his whole life, finally believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, and therefore he was saved. Now this goes deep because I just described to you that the thieves at the crucifixion were God's, or were the eyes, right, in your head, but and that only one eye would be saved. Well, Jesus said that if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Okay. He also said if your right hand causes you to sin, to cut it off. He also says cast your net to the right side. We also know that Jesus was going to be at the right hand of God. Okay. I was just reading about right brain people, and what they said is the people that are right brain thinkers think that there's going to be a savior that's going to save them. And I think if we believe in that, then we're on the right side of the right brain, because I believe in a savior, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, most certainly I don't either. And it actually, there's a book called The Gospel of Nicodemus where I read and had shared in a show that I did just recently on the two witnesses of a Revelation 11. But when Adam and all of his ancestors were taken up from the bondage of Sheol, because when Christ died on the cross, the 3 days that he was separated from his body, he went down into Sheol, broke open the gates of iron, the doors of brass, and freed Adam and the patriarchs and took him up to paradise, turned him over to the archangel Michael. They were baptized in the Archerusian lake and then allowed to enter into New Jerusalem as the city of God, which is located in the third heaven. That this is also the place from which Adam and Eve were tending the garden of God before they were tempted and fell and then were cast out and exiled here to the earth, where the fallen angels had already been cast out too, the rebel angels. But anyways, before they were taken up into paradise as the first fruits of the resurrected dead, Enoch and Elijah saw the thief that had died on the cross, and they were questioning him because he looked like a criminal. And they asked him who he was, and he told them the story of how he had been with Yeshua and that he was on the right hand side, and that he believed because he saw the signs. There was earthquakes, signs in the heavens, signs in the skies. There was the sun became blood red, and also the moon became blood red and was also eclipsed. And so he knew that Yeshua was no just ordinary person, and being innocent, that he most certainly did not deserve to be crucified. And so he believed in seeing the signs, and because of that belief, as you said, he was allowed to go to paradise directly after dying on the cross, and he actually beat Adam and the rest of the patriarchs that were going to be resurrected. And when they got up there, they asked him who he was as well, and he told them, and they were just blown away and just gave all glory and praise to the Most High God. And so if people want to know more about that particular story, check it out in the Gospel of Nicodemus. It's also spoken about in the Gospel of Bartholomew, but One last thing, and I'll turn this back over to you. When you were speaking about this throne, and Kathy had posted a picture from one of your videos, which shows, it most certainly does look like a throne in the cross section of the image of the brain. But I was thinking, and for those that have never seen, have you ever seen a dove orchid?
No.
Well, it's interesting, and you can just Google this on your computer and look at the images. When you pull up a dove orchid, when it opens, when it blooms, it actually looks like a peace dove in the very inside of the flower, which I thought that was amazing, and it totally reminded me of, this that you had pulled out as far as the cross section, the image of the brain. So everybody check that out too. Just Google search a dove orchid, and you'll see what I'm talking about. As far as it looks like a dove in the very center of the flower, and it's seated, much like this throne in the brain. It's totally interesting. But go ahead, Casey. Continue.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't realize is that the very first miracle that Jesus ever performed, he was 12 years old. That matches our 12 tribes of Israel, our 12 intracranial nerves, and so on and so forth, right? But what was his first miracle? He was in a temple, okay? Now remember, granted, we're talking about the temple. We're talking about the throne of God. Jesus' first miracle in a temple, and he fascinated physicians, doctors. And when I read that verse, I couldn't believe it, because I never learned about that in church, about Jesus' first miracle at 12 years old, fascinating a doctor. And then I began to think to myself, what could he have possibly said to these doctors to fascinate them? And I believe that he knew pieces of our anatomy that no one else knew. And now that we've established that Jesus is at the pineal position, and that the two thieves are the eyes, and he was crucified at Golgotha, place of the skull. So now we have a complete anatomy of the head, with the brain of the throne of God, Jesus crucified basically at God's feet down on earth. Now we can start continuing to follow the pathway of light. Now, the optic chiasm is an interesting place in the center of the brain at the pineal position, because the optic nerves cross in the middle. They actually overlap and go to opposite sides of the brain. So your left eye crosses over into the right brain, and the right eye crosses over into the left brain. And they call this place the optic chiasm. Now, the word chiasm is interesting because it means the going in and the coming out. It's also a literary format. So it's a style of writing in which a story is told. You get to the middle of the story, and then you start untelling the story, basically. So you start repeating yourself in order of the way that you came into the story after the midway point of the story. And this is called the chiastic literary format. And it's interesting because the description of the chiastic literary format in outline form is A, B, B, A. And that's
wow.
Abba. And so when Christ said, Abba, take this cup from me, what he was really saying was, where the optic nerves cross, it forms a cup. And then when they cross in the midbrain and go into the rear brain over the throne of God, that's another cup. So he was turning the cup over from the eyes, the material realm. He sacrificed himself, and then he turned it over to the spiritual realm, to the throne of God. And there's only one way to the Father, and that is through that optic chiasm, through the cross, through Jesus Christ. And that's what he meant. He wasn't saying, God, I can't handle this, take this cup from me. That's not what was happening. He was speaking in code so that people could understand finally who the one and only true God is.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, this goes on because, God talks about the cup of God's wrath. There's also a cup of goodness. Okay. The world is filling with sin, just like in a cup. Okay, it's all the material realm where your eyes converge into the optic chiasm. It's like the cup, and it's filling up with sin. Okay. Now, when these optic nerves reach the middle of the brain and radiate back out, they radiate into this like array, and it's I forget the actual name of it, but you can look it up in anatomy books, and it's almost like the many rooms of God's mansion. You know, he talks about there are many rooms for you. We also know that at the location of the crucifixion, I think you had told me this, that David slayed Goliath. Was that you that were telling me this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, we were speaking about Golgotha, which if you look up that it means also, besides the Hill of the Skulls, Goliath of Gath, and that it was during when David had stunned Goliath with the sling stone and then ran up to him and cut his head off with Goliath's own sword. He then took the head of Goliath to Jerusalem to show to the Hebrew people that he had slain the Philistine champion. And, you know, after doing that, then he buried it at what came to be known as Golgotha, the place of the skull, but that this was actually the fulfillment of of Genesis 3:15, where it speaks about, I will put enmity between thy seed and her seed, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and that speaking about the coming, because that was a prophecy of the coming of Yeshua as Savior Messiah, that he would be crushing the head of the serpent at the same time that the serpent was nipping at the heel of the seed of the woman, that was actually fulfilled when Yeshua was crucified on the cross, because he, as the seed of the woman and as the prophetic fulfillment of Genesis 3:15, was crushing the head of Goliath, whose skull was buried there on Golgotha. And we know that Goliath, as a six-fingered, six-toed giant, hybrid giant, that he was in fact one of the seed of the serpent. And
Exactly.
so that all was fulfilled then.
He's from a long bloodline of Nephilim post-flood.
Yes.
And to add more details to this, what David did is he picked up 5 smooth stones. And I believe these stones represented the 5th age, which is the end of time, which is where we're at now. And he struck Goliath with a stone in the pineal position,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Also,
where
Goliath had 4 other brothers too. So, he could have took out all of them if he needed to. But
Right.
please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, struck him in the pineal position, and then millennia later, I don't know, I think it might have been 14, and 14 generations from Abraham to Christ. Was that it? I think this is what the Bible says. Anyway, Christ would be crucified in the same location, in that single central position. So it was basically Christ demonstrating dominion and power over sin, just as David did. And of course, David and Christ were from the same bloodlines.
Right.
So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Now-
all of that is amazing.
Yeah, now this is amazing because everything is coded. People ask, did these events really happen? Absolutely, they happened. But all these people were following instructions from God, the Most High. They had to have faith. That's why we should never question what God asks us to do, because we could be acting out some future event that is going to prove validity to God and verify the Most High. And so that's what these Bible patriarchs did. They followed God's instructions, and in living their lives, they acted out what we now read in the Bible so that we can know who the one and only true God is. Other verses talk about the footstool of God, and this is where we travel from the optic nerves. We're following the pathway of light, and it goes down into the backs of the eyeball. So if you guys are on computers, pull up the anatomy of the human eye, and you'll see how the optic nerve plugs in to the back of the eyeballs. But also you have 4 muscles plugging into the back of these eyes. And I believe those are the four angels at the four corners of the earth. They also become the four legs of the footstool of God sitting upon the earth. And now we can look at the eye as the actual shape of the universe. With looking back from the optic nerve in through the front of the eye, we see the lens of the eye. And I believe we are living atop the inner lens of the eye. Now, this is depicted in film, okay, but nobody really saw this as it was playing out in the film The Hunger Games, where they showed Katniss at the end, and they were in this dome, right? And she pulls out her bow, which is an arc, which looks like the hill valley or the curved surface of the hill inside the valley, which is the inner eye, the convex lens. And she pulled back her bow and shot an arrow, which attached to it was a cord. Well, that piece of anatomy is the hyaloid canal. It is a narrow gate. It's basically an artery. It was a former artery before, in utero, before the child was born, and then at that point, it disappeared at birth.
Hold on, brother. We'll be right back, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I did want to clarify something really quick, because this is also one of the reasons why I began to study and examine the extra biblical texts, and it's because we find within the canon a very small amount of these stories of Jesus's life, of Yeshua's life. And as Casey had mentioned, there's really only one story about him being in the temple when he was 12 years old, and he had separated himself from his parents. And when they retraced their steps, they found him in the temple, and he was teaching even the scholars and the physicians and the other people, very well learned individuals. He was teaching them about doctrine and about the scripture. And when you read like the Protevangelion of James, which was written by James, who was the half brother of Christ, or the infancy gospels according to Thomas, who was also the half brother of Yeshua, both of them were Joseph's children from a previous marriage before he became the caretaker of both Mary and Yeshua. And who would know better about the life and the infancy, the story of Mary, than two of his half-brothers, which grew up with him. They were also apostles, became two of the 12 apostles, which were sent out to the world to teach. James also became the first bishop of the Jerusalem church after the establishment of it following the death of Christ. But when you look to and examine and read from these two huge collections of the childhood stories of Christ in his infancy and his early childhood, you learn and you recognize that he was performing miracles even when he was very young, and Mary even healed many other people by either allowing them to use the bathwater that she had bathed Christ within, or allowing them to wear for certain moment, or even just touch his swaddling clothes. And that this, in my opinion, when you go back and read and study all of this information, it absolutely affirms that Christ was God incarnate from the moment he came into world, and that he was, and even Mary was able to perform miracles. Even the midwife, which went in to assist Mary in bringing forth Yeshua in the cave, she did not believe that Mary was a virgin. And in the stories, it talks about how she checked, and because of doing so, she was cursed and her arm was withered. And then she begged and prayed for forgiveness that she doubted that Mary was a virgin even after having brought forth Yeshua. And the angel told her, Gabriel told her to just pick up Christ and to hold him, and that she would be healed. And that was actually the first miracle that was associated with him being God incarnate. And so he had been performing miracles all throughout, even his young life, even when he was a baby, even when he was a young child. And so I do recommend people read and study all of that, because it's deeply moving. The first few times I read it, when I first discovered these texts, I read it to my parents, and I cried. My parents cried. I mean, it's deeply moving. You can't not be moved by the Spirit in reading about the young life and the childhood of our Lord and Savior. And why wouldn't you want to know more about him, you know? And so please do check out those books written by his half brothers. But anyways, please, Casey, continue.
Yeah, you know, we've been confined in our thought by the traditions of men in terms of religious paradigm. And what that's done is a disservice to the deeper truths of the Bible. In fact, as you know, some of our biggest attackers are Christians, because if it doesn't come out of a pastor's mouth, they think it's a new age or it's wrong. Everything we do uplifts the Lord Jesus Christ. We know he's the only way through the narrow gate. And so I'm baffled when I get attacked by a Christian because they think I'm a New Ager. New Agers try to find a way around Christ to get to
deny Christ.
Exactly. And we uplift and help unpack some of these deeper truths. Now, there's a reason why the church will never admit to these deeper truths. It is because they will have to admit they were wrong. They will have to admit that the Holy Spirit is not working in them because of their iniquities, right, because of them trying to make the material temple instead of promoting the spiritual temple and promoting people having a direct connection with God. But instead they become the God brokers. They're brokers. They're the middleman, which is not necessary, and they know it. But you know, I want to continue along the lines of this in describing this pathway of light, as we started with the brain, went through the center of the brain, and now we're at the backs of the eyes, and we're going to tell you in very fine detail what this center part of your eyes actually represents. There are many verses in the Bible about the eye. Even when Christ said, "I am," well, when you look at the Greek word for eye, he was speaking in terms of himself. The Greek word looks like the English word EYE, except the last E in that is rotated. Now, that is not a coincidence that the word I, when he was speaking of himself, looks also like the word eye, like the physical eyeball. That is not an accident. Jesus also talks about the eye is the lamp of the body, and he says that in singular format, not the eyes. He says the eye, singular, is the lamp of the body. And he says if your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But then he says, but if, on the same token, if your eye is dark, your whole body will be full of darkness. He was talking about the fight between good and evil, and how evil can overtake us, and that we could be living in the dark eye as well. And that might be, you know, the left side of the brain, which is more like the knowledge, which is the serpent, Ophia. And we're going to get into that probably later as soon as we get through some of this other parts of the anatomy. But, of course, he talks about if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. We also hear references in the Bible about Israel being the apple of God's eye. So there are many references that basically suggest that the word eye has a lot more meaning than we originally thought. We also hear the speck in your eye and the beam in your eye. We also hear the narrow and wide gates. And I believe what the wide gate really is the looking out to the material realm rather than looking in. And when you look in, you go through the narrow gate, which is the hyaloid canal. It's a very narrow strip which connected the lens of your eye to the optic nerve. So it goes through the central vitreous humor of the eye, which is, I believe, the Red Sea. And I believe when Moses parted the Red Sea, he was giving an analogy of this structure of the internal eye, with this vitreous humor floating inside, parted by this canal, this hyaloid canal, which was the same analogy as the flood, okay, where the remnant was made its way through 40 days and 40 nights of rain, just like the Israelites were 40 years in the wilderness, just like Jesus was 40 days in the wilderness, okay? This is all just one big analogy because we all had to go through the watery wilderness. Now, this is amazing because the hyaloid canal, when it atrophies, when the human child is in utero at 40 millimeters of size, so there's that 40 number again. Remember, 40 days in the wilderness, 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Well, at 40 millimeters, that hyaloid canal begins to disintegrate and degrade, okay? And by the time the child is born, the hyaloid canal is gone because it's already done its job of providing nourishment from the optic nerve through the vitreous humor, through the wilderness, to the lens of the eye. So it's almost like a transfiguration from the spiritual realm of the child down into the material realm of looking out. Basically, our prison, okay? Now, this goes deeper because this vitreous humor of the eye and the inner eye is also an analogy of the womb. It's like Russian dolls. It's like life within life. And so what do I mean? Well, the womb is also a watery place with a thin, narrow gate. What is that? That's the umbilical cord, which just so happens to be called a stump. After the child's born, it's cut off. It's called a stump. And I believe that the stump, these cut off cords, represent the former glory of all of these trees of the garden. And we are now cut off from that. And we have to find our way back through the narrow gate. Now, before we went to break, I was telling you how in the film The Hunger Games, they depicted this narrow gate, this hyaloid canal, where the remnant is. And by the way, when it deteriorates and degrades and you see floaters, they say that that is called a remnant, just like the remnant of the 8 that made it on the ark, just like the remnant of Israelites that made it through the Red Sea. It's called a remnant, and you actually visually see floaters because of this remnant that is left behind from the narrow gate. Now, we've forgotten all this because of amnesia or amniotic fluid of the womb, right? When the image comes in through your eye, it comes in upside down. What position is a child in before they're born? They're upside down. They're connected by an umbilical cord, which is like the hyaloid canal. They're surrounded by amniotic fluid, which is like the vitreous humor in the eye. There's also nutrition surrounding the child. That's the placenta. That's just like the retina of the eye. Now, there's such a thing called the fruit of the womb. This is mentioned in the Bible. But there's also fruit that lies the internal walls of the eye. What am I talking about? It's called the ganglion, the rods and cones, and the bipolar cells. And they look just like pomegranates, figs, and grapes. Now, this is depicted in Exodus 13 when the 12 scouts from the 12 tribes of Israel went into the land of Canaan. What are the 12 tribes of Israel? The 12 intracranial nerves. They went into the land of Canaan and they brought back on a pole, right? The pole is the hyaloid canal, the narrow gate. They brought back pomegranates, figs, and grapes on a pole. They were depicting the inner eye, except they went into the evil eye of the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey. Remember, they were describing the depiction of the light entering the eye, regulating the milk and the honey, the melatonin, and then the serotonin. And it just so happens there's a condition called Alice in Wonderland syndrome that on the onset of sleep, as the lights go out and the melatonin starts releasing in your brain, certain individuals have a condition in which everything looks really small. And it's called AIWS, Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Micropsia is the technical term. And it's some kind of chemical reaction as the top part of the brain has these receptors that is receiving this melatonin. It creates this alteration in your depth perception. Well, what were they saying in Exodus 13 when they came back? They said, we looked like grasshoppers in their eye, as also we looked like grasshoppers in each other's eyes. So I pulled up a picture of a grasshopper, and lo and behold, all grasshopper species have a dot in the middle of their forehead in the pineal position, the very gland, or what would we call it, that it regulates milk and honey, melatonin, serotonin through light. It's all there, laid out in the Bible perfectly. It's amazing. So, I'm trying to think what else we have here. Now, this goes even further because there's talk in the book of Revelation about an angel from the east. So we already described the four muscles of the back that go into the back of the eye, right? Well, there's a fifth muscle. I forget the name of it. I think it's called the oblique muscle, and it rotates around the eye. And it connects into what they call the trochlea, which is near your nasal passage, okay? And it looks like a little book. Well, Revelations mentions an angel with a little book with 1 foot in the ocean, that's the vitreous humor, and 1 foot on the land, the earth. And that's exactly what it looks like in your inner anatomy, okay? Then he says the angel reaches his hand up to heaven. Well, that muscle, when you look at that eye structure again, looks like it's reaching up to heaven. And I mean, this is just fascinating. It's the whole world, the whole universe, the shape of our universe in heaven within our very anatomy. Now, Ezekiel takes it a step further in Ezekiel 1:26, and it says, above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was with the appearance of a man high above it. So they're describing, if you look through the optic nerve, that is the firmament where the stars are. But we can't see past the stars to heaven because it's blocked out, because we're locked in sin, right? In the sin dimension. But they knew in Ezekiel that there was a throne past the firmament, and that's the throne of the brain, showing us in the anatomy. Now, this is where we get into female anatomy and male anatomy, because the female anatomy looks like these pomegranates, grapes, and figs. And in fact, the ovary would be like the eggs, where the eggs are held. This is the dust, okay? Then you have the fallopian tube, which the word fallopian, you have the word fall, so that's like the fall of man. You also have opium, and the root word for opium is opiate, or it also means knowledge, it means to see, and it means serpent. That root word, ophia, okay? So now we have the fall and the ophia. And I think you had some input on that as well, Zen, about that word on our last show.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and it's really sad because we did a show where we covered all this previously, but it ended up disappearing. But anyways, in that show, I spoke about how Ophis means the serpent, and it was the serpent beguiling Eve, which caused them to lose their immortal bright nature. And when they were tempted, when Adam and Eve wanting or Eve wanting to be as God, because Satan promised her Godhead and Godhood to be as a goddess. That's also one of the reasons why she ate. But when they ate, that's when their bodies were transformed into flesh, their genitals appeared, and that's when she was seduced by the serpent. And so all of that, them eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that was Eve being tempted, and when they touched and ate of that fruit, that was her actually becoming seduced, beguiled by the serpent, which means wholly seduced, and that's what caused them to lose their immortal bright nature. And she was impregnated with Cain. Adam eating the fruit was him repeating the act with Eve, and that's what resulted in Eve being pregnant with Abel, who was of Adam's seed. And so when they went before judgment, this is also why they hid their genitalia with fig leaves, because previous to that, they were angelic beings. They didn't have genitalia because they had no reason or need to propagate. They were not yet in a fallen state. They were not yet in human form. They did not have, as Casey is describing here, this particular anatomy. And it wasn't until they touched the tree, well, Eve touched the tree, that being transformed in the flesh, again, that's when her genitalia appeared. That's when she was seduced by the serpent, impregnated with Cain. Repeating the act with Adam, she then became pregnant with Abel. And that's why we see in the story, when they hide themselves and God calls them forth, he knew that she was already pregnant, that she had been tempted, and that she had, and that's why in the curses it says that she would bring forth children in pain and sorrow, and that her desire would be for her husband. And this is also why the curse that was levied against the serpent would be that there would be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and between thy sons and her sons. And then he was also had his limbs removed and was put on his belly to eat the dust, which we know that the body, the human body, is also made of the dust. It's of the earth. And in my opinion, this is why we see reflected in Satanism the cannibalism that is so prevalent, and the drinking of blood, that's the serpent feeding on the dust. And so all of that is reflected in their losing their immortal bright natures, being transformed into flesh, and then cast out of paradise, because it was to the earth where the rebel angels had already been banished to, that the Adam and Eve, being transformed on the 8th day, they were cast out. After a day of rest, they were cast out, and they were placed here on the earth in a fallen state. And you can read the first book of Adam and Eve for great detail on this transformation and how it took place, because they did not even recognize how to walk, which in my mind means that, they are able, in heaven, we are able to move without physically plodding on our feet, that we can project our will to move forth as we do in our dreams. And that also they weren't and had no recognition of daylight as far as the heat of the sun. They had never experienced darkness. They had never eaten or drank anything as far as their need for water, and also they ate figs as their first meal. But all of that was totally unnatural and weird to them initially when they first were transformed into flesh and cast out. Casey?
Right. And as you said, their anatomy was much, much different than it is now. And it seems as though the anatomy encoded not only the curse, but the plan of salvation as we laid out with the optic nerves and the eyes. But continuing on with this female anatomy, you see these finger-like projections, which actually seem to seduce the eggs from the ovaries every 28 days of the cycle, of the woman's cycle. And it literally looks like the serpent consuming the dust, just like the Bible said it would happen, consuming the dust. And as the egg travels down the fallopian tube, it travels through with a mechanism of peristalsis, which is basically the contractions and loosening of muscle to basically seduce the egg down the fallopian tube into the uterus. So here you have the serpent. Now here's what's interesting about the fruit of the womb. The pomegranate has 400 seeds in it. The ovary, the human ovary, has 4,000 seeds, but every cycle, 1,000 seeds are wasted. So the ratio of seeds in a woman's ovary compared to a pomegranate are the same. And that's fascinating because there you have the pomegranate. The fig becomes the uterus. When you do a cross-section of the uterus during its full cycle and you cut a fig open, there is a void which looks almost exactly the same. And then the grapes become the lower genitalia on the vagina and all of that. And there we have our complete 3 sets of fruit. Now, what else happens in this peristalsis? Well, as the egg is consumed, it's the dust, the serpent eating the dust, the days of its life, seducing the egg from the ovary every 28 days. We also begin to see... Okay.
Hold on. We'll be right back, everyone. All right. Welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm going to address a question from the chat room really quick. Melissa asked, do either of you have any proof that pre-fall bodies did not have blood? I got in an argument with someone a while back and wanted some references. David Carrico and I covered this in great detail, and he actually speaks about how it is how the life is in the blood, and that when that previous, even in a spiritual body and spiritual form, that they had bones and flesh, but they were clothed with light, what is referenced as light vesture in the Targum, and also in the first book of Adam and Eve, it is referenced as their spiritual bodies. But yes, it wasn't until they were transformed into flesh that they then had blood, and the life is in the blood. The spirit is carried in the blood, and having a human body, then, having a heart, and the blood carries the oxygen, the breath, which is the spirit, and it carries that throughout the body to feed the spirit, which is inhabited within the body. But as far as specifically references to the blood, I will ask David Carrico, or you can ask him specifically yourself, because he's done a great deal of work on this particular topic. I myself have only studied and read about this from all these many different texts, and so I'll ask him if he has any references that he can share with you, and then I will get back with you. If you want to email me at zengarcia2010@gmail.com, I'll be glad to either pass on your email or to get back with you. But let me turn it back over to you, Casey. And also, I've got, at some point in this segment, I want to share a few passages which also affirm how the eye is a microcosm of the enclosed world system. But if you would also give out your website and contact information once more.
Sure. It's Enterthe5t4rz.com. And again, we've got a live show tab that you can click on, and any time I could go live, it'll stream directly into the website. And there's a chat. There's also a map around the world where you can see all the other people that are on the website and get in touch with people. So that's a great resource. So I guess we were talking about the womb and the female anatomy. Now, guys aren't off the hook on this because our anatomy also encodes the curse. The male anatomy is the cobra. It is a serpent. And it has a neck around it like a cobra, which can be circumcised away, which is why I believe the Hebrew priests, were required to have circumcision, because that represented domination over the curse. In other words, the removing of the ring. And when you look at the surgery of circumcision, it literally removes a ring from around the male anatomy. And this is like the ring of Saturn. So it's domination over time, over Chronos, by removing the ring, which is why God symbolically had men be circumcised, because they were part of the pure bloodline of Christ to come, and they were not cursed by the serpent. And this all fits into all the work you do on the two bloodlines, the enmity between them since the Garden of Eden. This is the main theme of the Bible, yet it's missed in church because they don't want you to know that there's two bloodlines running around on this planet. So this goes deep because now back to the womb in the fruit that we were talking about in the female anatomy. And I was telling you also that the womb is an analogy of the inner eye. And so when we look at the inner eye and the walls of the inner eye, again, we see these ganglion bipolar cells and the rods and cones, which also represent the three fruits, the pomegranates, the figs, and the grapes. And anyone can look up those names that I just said, and you can look at them, and they look exactly like the fruit that I described. And I believe this is where the garden was. So again, we're standing on the hill valley, the convex lens in the inner eye. We're looking up at the walls of the eye, the inside of the eye, and I believe that the garden that's where the garden was. Now, when you do cross sections of the walls of the inner eye, where this fruit is, you get hexagonal honeycomb matrix. So if you can look that up, cross section of the rods and cones of the eye, and there you get a honeycomb matrix. This is the prison. This was what Katniss was shooting her bow at in the Hunger Games, into this dome, and you saw the same hexagonal honeycomb matrix. We also saw the TV series V that they remade, and the aliens speak from these giant honeycomb matrix images on the bottoms of their ships. They speak down to the people on Earth. This is representing the limits of this enclosed world that we live in. But it's not only above us, it's below us too. Because when you take the same cross-section underneath our feet, the convex lens, you get the same hexagonal honeycomb pattern. And where on earth do we see this? We see it at the Devil's Postpile at Mammoth, this same honeycomb matrix pattern coming up out of the earth. We see it in Scotland. It's called the Giant's Causeway. Notice how all of the names given in these places are of giants and fallen angels and demons, because they are the curse. The hexagonal honeycomb is also the shape and texture and image of the skin of the snake. It looks just like a honeycomb matrix as well. So now we begin to put all the puzzle pieces together. We begin to understand what is happening here. We're an enclosed center of the universe. Everything is rotating above us within the enclosed world. We're locked in by a honeycomb matrix. This is our prison. It's the hex. It's the hex of time. which is why the North Pole of Saturn has a hexagon on it. That's Chronos. We're locked in the sin sine wave of time. The only way out of it is through the Son, Jesus Christ.
Amen. I would also add that our brother Jonathan Kleck just recently, he did a show where he was showing how when you look really close at the human skin under like a microscopic level, or not even like really hardcore microscopic level, but it shows and fits up with the pattern of a snake skin. And so he was talking about how our human flesh, our flesh bodies, our flesh suits, that which we inhabit for lifetime, that this is, also like the serpent skin and like the curse of the serpent upon us. And so it's fascinating that it falls in line with what you're talking about. And since we're talking about the enclosed world system, I'm going to share really quick these few verses which affirm what we are talking about. And then I'll get you to comment on this as well, Casey. But it says, in that passage that I read, also the world resembles the ball of his eye, the ocean that encircles the earth like unto the white of the eye. The dry land is the iris, Jerusalem the pupil, and the temple the image mirrored in the pupil of the eye. And so you see that the ocean is one huge, it's not like 7 different oceans as we see portrayed on the globe, but all of the waters of the world are connected together in one uniformity, in one grand, it speaks of this as Oceanus is the name of this one huge cosmic ocean, and that it unites all the waters of the world, even all the rivers, the brooks, the seas, all of the lakes. They all form what is called sea level, which is, the horizontal, the flatness that water assumes when it collects together in pool. And so I'm going to read just a couple of passages which also affirm what we are talking about as far as the shape of the world and how it is a flat plane, and that all the oceans of the world surround the continents as in a ring. The first one is from the Targum rendering of Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 7. It says this: all the rivers and springs of water continually flow into the water of the ocean, which surrounds the world like a ring. But the ocean is not filled, and to the place is where the rivers continually flow. They return there in order to flow from the spouts of the deep. Now, also, for those that have followed my work, you know that at the very center of the flat earth plane at the North Pole, there is what is referenced as a great whirlpool, and that this whirlpool sucks in all the waters of the oceans for 6 hours and then reverses course, and after 6 hours spews them out. And then 6 more hours later, it reverses and will suck in the oceans again, and 6 more hours later, it spews them out. This is what creates the high and low tides on the plane of the earth, is this sucking, this vortex of water being pulled into the interior of the earth and then being expelled in reverse in reverse manner. And it's also, as it's reflected in this passage, it's also spoken about in other passages. I'm going to share 2 more. One is from 1 Clement. It says this: the basin of the bottom of the boundless sea. Now remember, if you look up the word basin, it's like a sink, like, your kitchen sink, or like a bathtub, and which is exactly what the earth, as far as the oceans, they are held in a giant basin. All the waters of the deep are gathered together. And the dry land, remember when it appeared, it was elevated above sea level, and that's what made the land to actually be dry. And that's why where the earth and the waters of the deep, of the bottomless deep, meet, that's where we have the beaches and even the Antarctic ice wall is part of all this, but that's where sea has its level. All right. The basin of the boundless sea, gathered together by his workmanship into its reservoirs, passeth not the barriers wherewith it is surrounded. Now that's speaking about the Antarctic ice wall, because that is the ring, as it said in the passage that I read previously, that contains all the waters of the deep. But even as he ordered it, so it doeth. For he said, so far shalt thou come, and thy waves shall be broken within thee. The ocean which is impassable for men and the worlds beyond it are directed by the same ordinances of the master. And so you can see that that the Antarctic ice wall is what is the outer edges of this ring, which contain all the waters of the ocean. And one final passage. This is from the second book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch. It says this: and then I made firm the heavenly circle, and made that the lower water, this is the waters below, which is under heaven, collect itself together into one whole, and that the chaos become dry, and it became so. Out of the waves I created rock, hard and big, and from the rock I piled up the dry, and the dry I called earth, and the midst of the earth I called the abyss. Now that's the vortex, the hole, where Job says in chapter 26, hell is naked beneath, hell remains naked and open to God. And it's in that place at the North Pole that this vortex, this hole, is located. This is also a passage to the hollow earth, the interior of the earth. I called abyss, that is to say, the bottomless. I collected the sea in one place and bound it together with a yoke. And I said to the sea, behold, I give you your eternal limits, and you shalt not break loose from your component parts. Thus I made fast the firmament. This day I called the first created. And so you can see that all of these references, they're all, some of them extra biblical, of course, but they all affirm the creation as being gathered and established in the same way, that the waters of the below are gathered together in what is a basin, which are the oceans of the world, the land which contains and holds all the water, and then you have the dry land which appears above sea level, that this is where the dry earth is, which we all live and inhabit upon as creatures that live upon the ground, the dry ground. And yeah, the entirety is directly reminiscent and reflective of the eye as the enclosed world system, as the microcosm of the enclosed world system. Casey?
Yes. And when we start to see things in that fashion, we begin to understand the prison that we're locked in, and that Satan is down here with us. And he cannot break through the firmament. He's stuck here. And this is why NASA has to make up all these stories about deep space and galaxies billions and billions of miles away, and make us feel so small, because then they can come with their deception of alien life. Why? Because there's infinite possibilities of alien life if the universe is infinite and vast, right? So therefore, we'll be willing to accept alien life. And people are wondering, okay, Casey, what does this all mean? That some of us are serpent blood and some of us are not. Well, there are probably very few of us that do not have the serpent blood. We've been mixed down throughout time. There is probably a pure bloodline, which will coincide with the above of the pure bloodline of Christ. But we don't know who those people are yet. They could be amongst us. But you're saying, okay, well, what hope is there then? The hope is that the blood of the Lamb cleanses your blood. And that's why there had to be a blood sacrifice, because the blood of the Lamb cleanses our blood. This wasn't some sick satanic sacrificial system. This was a sacrificial system out of necessity, because it's the purifying agent of the blood. This is why I said, this is my blood and this is my body. And so he came to save the Jews and the Gentiles through our belief in him. And isn't it interesting that the word Gentiles has tiles in it, which is like the serpent tiles of the skin. They call snakeskin tiles. And isn't it interesting that Jesus healed Saul, his sight? He was blind. Well, how? Because scales, like tiles, fell from Saul's eyes. The very same scales I was describing to you, the inner eye and the lining of the eye, and also the lens of the eye. So there's a lot of clues as to the exact nature of the shape of our universe.
Yeah, absolutely, which is completely fascinating, because before I had, and I know that this is really new for a lot of people, and that there's a lot of people that haven't even begun to embrace it as possibility, but that many are now being led to this as discernment and revelation of truth. And because of that, all of us are being forced to reconsider all that we thought we knew. And in fact, somebody in the chat room had sent me a link for the flatearthguide.com, where it has connections to many of the shows, even our show, where we covered this as an aspect of truth. But in pulling up the blog, I see that even Michael Tellinger had just recently sent him a letter stating, and I'll read just a really quick short segment of it. After many months of research, I still cannot find any scientifically accepted proof of a physical nature that the Earth is moving through space, and that it actually is a ball. Everything I held dear and as an unshakable truth has been shaken to its core and stripped of all credibility. It is more clear than ever before that everything we have been told is a lie. And so even he and anybody that really does the research, I mean, it is conclusive. The Earth is not moving in any way, shape, or form at any rate or velocity. It's not spinning once daily in order to create the sunrise and sunset, but it is the sun moving in circle above the face of the earth, as described in the book of Enoch and many other places, as I've shared in many different verses, that creates it leaving and entering our line of sight. And that what we see as it coming as far as sunrise and then leaving our sight as sunset is simply it reaching the vanishing point. And that all things, when they leave and they reach the vanishing point and leave our eyesight, they converge with the horizon and seem to disappear beneath or merge with it. And so all of that is just, you have to just understand its true workings in a different way. I'll read one final passage and then I'll get you to comment. This again is from Clement number 1. It says this: the heavens are moved by his direction and obey him in peace. Day and night accomplish the course assigned to them by him without hindrance one to another. The sun and the moon and the dancing stars, according to his appointment, circle in harmony within the bounds assigned to them without any swerving aside. And again, as I explained, when we see the sun rising in the morning, that is it entering our perspective, our field of view. That's what brings us the day. And then we see it arc in circuit across the sky. It moves up and continues to move in an arc, which is a circle, towards the heavens, where it reaches its height near around noon, and then it starts to drop and to circle back down towards the horizon. And at sunset, it leaves our field of view and actually continues to move in circle around the rest of the flat circular plane of the earth. And it is bringing day, because when we see it sunset here, that is sunrise for somebody else. And it just continues to, as it enters into the field of illumination, into the field of view of other people on the circular earth plane, that's what creates sunrise. But let me go ahead and turn this over to you, Casey, for final comment. And no, we appreciate you, brother.
Well, much love. Yeah. When we think about the descriptions given in the book of Enoch of windows and gates of the sun, and then we look at, for instance, the United Nations map, we begin to see the circle of the earth from the top-down view. And you see the gates that are mentioned in the book of Enoch. They look like the targets on the UN map that we see. Now, this is interesting because certain windows open. There's 12 windows that open and close as the sun circles around on these tracks. It almost looks like a record track above the circle of the earth. And as you said, the earth is fixed. It's not moving. What's moving is the sun and the moon. Now, how do we know this? Because they follow the ecliptic. The sun and the moon actually follow the same path. How can that be when we're told by science that they're millions of miles, hundreds of millions of miles apart? How is it that they're both seem to follow each other? It's because they're much closer to each other than we think. And in fact, all of the planets and all of the heavenly bodies follow the same ecliptic. How can that be when they're supposed to be on completely different tracks, millions of miles apart?
Right.
It's because they're not. They're all much, much closer. And so now we begin to understand the nature of our universe. The only thing left to question is it the flat plane or is it a slightly raised surface? And I think either way, I think we're both on the right track. Yes. And God knows the
same
truth,
thing.
And it really doesn't matter, right?
Right. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just, of course, the land, the dry land, is above the flat circular plane of the earth, because that sea level is where the waters below unite with the dry land. Hey, brother, we appreciate you, man. We'll have to do it again sometime. God bless
Casey.
all.
God bless you all.
Kathy.
God bless you guys.
Good being with everyone. Be blessed all.
Big hug. Good night.
Hugs.
Good night. Big hugs.
Yeah. And people to just not like this kind of material and just to automatically dismiss it based on the heavy troll presence that is on YouTube. It's like a mind warfare, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are dealing with that as well. Go ahead.
I think what Casey has been discovering and bringing forth is some of the most amazing imaginable, especially for Christians, to see all of this confirmation in the human anatomy. I mean, the actual signature of God on his creation. Christians would be so excited about this. There was such excitement over the laminin, videos discovery. I think it was Louis Giglio who had, I'm pretty sure that he was the one that discovered it. But you've gone to such a deeper level, and it's so amazing. But they just don't know. They can't know. They won't know. And here this is. It just sits. And so I really encourage people to make sure you go to Casey's site and subscribe so you get notices at his site, because it started a few years ago for us on Facebook. I've noticed it's just been kind of a winnowing down. It started with the algorithms, the way they changed that so people wouldn't find you. And, we've dwindled down to just almost nothing, where our followers has, skyrocketed. People like us all the time by the hundreds every week, but no one knows that we're still there. We're just not in people's feeds. So it started for us a couple of years ago, but now it's really on steroids. I mean, people search us out who are the trolls and put in comments, and it brings such a dark spirit to the whole thing. And that's what's happening on YouTube. Anything I like, the likes are taken away now. And that's just constant right now. So it's going to a different level. So people really need to be proactive in knowing where to get the information and sharing it with other people, because this is important. This is God getting this message out. He's there. He's in us. And Casey's been given this revelation. I'm just really, really so, how did I get to be so lucky to be among all of you? And so thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that. We're in the last days, and God basically creates a counterbalance to anything that is evil. And for so long, they've had a heyday, with especially some of these New Agers and stuff like that. They take a little bit of the knowledge, like from the Egyptians, and then they try to say that the Egyptians had this secret knowledge of the brain anatomy, and then they try to basically dismiss the story of Christ. So this is God's counterbalance. He's like, okay, you want to try to claim this knowledge? Let me show you the knowledge that's in the Bible about the human anatomy. And that's
don't believe in God and don't see him reflected in the creation. To me, that is just, how can you not see God reflected in all things, in my opinion? Because all of it just shows again, in my opinion, just the divinely inspired nature of the mind of God, so go ahead, Jonas.
Absolutely. And this is the perfect show for an atheist. I did have an atheist come on one of my live shows, and I was a little unprepared because I had lost focus in terms of looking within the body, and I was kind of focused on other things on my channel at the time, and I kind of got blindsided. And he basically was trying to prove that there was no God, but because he was saying that Osiris and the ancient stories of the Egyptians predated Christianity, and that Christ's story was just a copycat of that. And of course, we know that's not true, but the bread and butter, I think, of the proof of God is in these miraculous overlays of anatomy. And we're going to get really specific tonight. I came prepared. And I'm going to get really specific about some of these discoveries that we made that overlay the human body. And they're basically, you can't dispute them. They're indisputable.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it shows and affirms that God is the author of both, the creator of the human body, as well as that of the creation. But before we do go into it, let me give you a chance to share your website, contact information, where people can go to support your work. And also, are you coming on at regular times? I know you do a lot of shows, and that some you do on the spur of the moment, but are you on a schedule to where people go and find you and support your work, like on on every Friday or whatever? I don't know. You can let us know, though.
Yeah, Sundays, usually Sunday mornings or Sunday afternoons, I try to get on. I'm trying a new format to where I'm streaming live through my website. So
Awesome.
The announcement will come on YouTube. So you'll get the notification. People who come to my YouTube channel, enter the 5T4RZ, enter the stars. You come on YouTube and subscribe to my channel, you'll get a notification. But then at that point, the live chat will happen on my website, which is enterthe5t4rz.com, enterthestars.com. And we'll have a live chat there, and also it will stream directly to my website. And then there's all kinds of resources on my website. for people to use tools to do research. We also have story posts there. And it's also a way for us to eventually get off of YouTube because there's a lot of censorship going on there right now. So that's the goal.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because we are experiencing the same kind of thing. But it seems like they are cracking down on a lot of channels that are bringing forth truth in different aspects and with regard to different topics, and that they are having restructured it in whatever way they're doing. They're most certainly censoring, filtering comments, even not allowing you to have certain keywords in your title. They are cracking down on, the whole monetization as well, which is affecting all of us because we are doing all of this and have been able to provide our material freely, because we have been able to also insert just ad placement over the videos that we do, and it just takes people four times over the course of a 2-hour video to just click through an ad, which is on like 5 seconds, which that greatly benefits us, and it also keeps the information flowing as far as making it freely available, and it also helps us to be able to do the things that we're doing. But it seems like even Facebook and other social websites, larger social mainstream media sites, that they are all trying to crack down in different way to keep the mainstream corporate news and the truth as asserted by them at the tops of these listings and search engines. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to find stories and to support the work that we're doing in the way that we're doing it. And so do you want to comment on that? And then we'll
I mean, mostly what I see is everything that you just said, but also they're actually physically on YouTube unsubscribing our subscribers. Mm-hmm. So if you got a new subscriber that comes on and might have heard some of our work, who wants to subscribe to the channel, they may subscribe, and then they kind of go on with their life and just trust that YouTube's going to notify them the next time one of our videos comes up. And this is the perfect time that YouTube chooses to unsubscribe these people. And then the person goes on with life, and life's drowned out by all the miscellaneous empty chatter that's thrown at them in this reality. And then they just kind of forget about us. And then you might not ever find that person again. And then, of course, our regulars, they're physically being unsubscribed from our channel, and they tell us about it, and I'm sure you've experienced it too.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As well as the social pressure that's put on mainstream citizens.
Wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
The body of a man is a microcosm, the whole world in miniature, and the world in turn is a reflex of man. The hair upon his head corresponds to woods of the earth, his tears to a river, his mouth to the ocean. Also, the world resembles the ball of his eye. The ocean that encircles the earth is like unto the white of the eye. The dry land is the iris. Jerusalem, the pupil, and the temple, the image mirrored in the pupil of the eye. Welcome all. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed. And I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. And I do pray that you are having a blessed new year and that life finds you of good health and well-being. I have as co-host this evening, as always, Kathy Dunson. Kathy, are you there, sister?
Yes, I am. And I wanted to point out that what you just read was from Legends of the Jews.
Yes, it's a most excellent text. And for those that have never heard of it or looked into it, it gives quite a lengthy and exorbitant testimony and affirms the biblical narrative, beginning with Genesis, going through all of the generations, the creation of Adam and Eve, all the beasts, and so it's a fascinating text to examine and look through. But the reason that I read it is because Casey, who is our guest for this evening, he did a show a long time ago where he spoke about how the enclosed world system is reminiscent of an eyeball. And so I'd like to welcome to the show once more Casey Brown, Enter the Stars. How are you, brother?
Good. Hello, Zen. Hello, Kathy. How are you guys doing this evening?
Doing well, man. I'm glad that you could take the time to
Hi,
join
Casey.
us.
Welcome.
Casey, Kathy loves you, Casey, so she's always glad to
That's
have
awesome.
you on with us.
Love you guys.
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, we love you too, brother. And we both, you and I, and Kathy, all of us, we've been confirming witness for one another on so many aspects of truth that are, just coming to light, including as far as the garden parable, what the real fruit, as far as the eating, Eve's eating of the fruit of the tree of the good and knowledge of good and evil, what all of that really represents. And so that was a huge blessing. And then also with regard to this, as the world, the flat earth and the enclosed world system, this is a even larger and more profound revelation. Both of them most certainly keys for unlocking, I believe, so much of what is veiled within Scripture.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many areas to look at when it comes to comparing the inner anatomy of our body, which I believe that God, being an architect, that he actually basically encoded our bodies with the truth about the universe that we live in, so that we could one day, when the knowledge increased in the last days, basically discover who the one and only true God of the Hebrew Bible is. And I've heard the argument from other people and other religions that they believe that that their God is no different than our God. But the difference is, when you start looking at this layout of the Bible and the events that happened, that really did happen, and you begin to decode and overlay that onto our body systems and anatomy and physiology, you understand that it is far too perfect and exact to be mistaken as coincidence. And then what that infers is that thousands of years ago, when these Bible books were written, when there was no knowledge of inner anatomy specifically anyways, there was general knowledge, but nothing to the extent of identifying nerves and muscle groups and things of that nature. And that's where we get the truth.
Yeah, in my opinion, it shows that the architect, the creator, the grand designer, that he encoded within the creation the same thing that we see replicated within the body of mankind. And so that affirms him to be the author and the creator of both. And so we see on the macrocosmic level, the microcosmic, and the earth, which is a union of heaven and hell, in the place where both come together, we see this reflected, as above, so below, that there's a synchronous, the signature of God is upon all of these things, and it shows that he most certainly is the mastermind, the divine architect, the triunal, the Godhead, that they were responsible for bringing all things into being. And so it's beautiful the way that is reflected, which, for those people that say they